We are going to continue here with the Psalms. We're going to continue with Psalm 38. Do not forsake me, O Lord. A Psalm of David for the memorial offering. O Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath, for your arrows have sunk into me, and your hand has come down on me. There is no soundness in my flesh, because of your indignation. There is no health in my bones, because of my sin. For my iniquities have gone over my head. Like a heavy burden, they are too heavy for me. My wounds stink and fester because of my foolishness. I am utterly bowed down and prostrate. All the day I go about mourning, for my sides are filled with burning, and there is no soundness in my flesh. I am feeble and crushed. I groan because of the tumult of my heart. O Lord, all my longing is before you. My sighing is not hidden from you. My heart throbs, my strength fails me, and the light of my eyes, it also has gone from me. My friends and companions stand aloof from my plague, and my nearest kin stand far off. Those who seek my life lay their snares. Those who seek my hurt speak of ruin and meditate treachery all day long. But I am like a deaf man. I do not hear, like a mute man who does not open his mouth. I have become like a man who does not hear, and in whose mouth are no rebukes. But for you, O Lord, do I wait. It is you, O Lord my God, who will answer. For I said, only let them not rejoice over me, who boast against me when my foot slips. For I am ready to fall, and my pain is ever before me. I confess my iniquity. I am sorry for my sin. For my foes are vigorous. They are mighty, and many are those who hate me wrongfully. Those who render me evil for good accuse me, because I follow after good. Do not forsake me, O Lord. O my God, be not far from me. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. So, first impressions would be that this is a man who has committed a mistake. He has sinned, and he is remorseful for it. He continues with his enemies, and he is seeking relief from the burdens that plague him. So let's go through this. Verse 1 and 2, O Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath. For your arrows have sunk into me, and your hand has come down on me. And so this plea of the psalmist, or perhaps of David that is writing, asking the Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath. And he goes along to say that the arrows, which is a symbol of this consequence, the result of an action, the arrows of the Lord have sunk into him. It pains him. He has already received the consequence. And the hand has come down on him. So he has already been judged. He said that there is no soundness in my flesh because of your indignation. And so what might this mean? If something is sound, we usually refer to this as something that is well put together. It's sturdy, stable. In terms of reason, it is of strong reason. It makes good sense. And he says, there is no soundness in my flesh. Because of your indignation. Now, this indignation is not a physical... The result of the indignation is not a physical consequence. The Lord is not literally casting arrows into the flesh of this person. The arrow and the soundness of flesh, these are symbols for something greater. And so when they say that there is no soundness in my flesh, we have to understand what the symbolism of flesh is. So if we were to unpack its possibilities here, the flesh can refer to the bodily, sort of more in a literal sense. It can also refer to the body in the sense of a sort of a physiological reaction due to the stresses of the mind. It can refer to the flesh or the body as a differentiator between the earthly and the spiritual principles, or the heavenly principle. And of course, the earthly principle is the lower. And so, what can we say of this? If it is indeed the case that David, or the author of this, committed some moral crime, sinned against the natural way of things, of the divine decree, it is a denaturing of the heavenly principle to sin. That is to say, it is to lower one's elevated circumstance in terms of their understanding of the finer things. Their misjudgment causes them anguish. And in this way, if we lower the heavenly principle, we lower our understanding and our drive, our purpose to extend ourselves into the world. And in this way, it bleeds down into our material reality or our earthly experience. And that could be the experiences of the body, hence the experience of the flesh. It can also refer to the flesh as a protective covering. And this protection is a part of a broader principle, one of stability and of certainty and of reasonableness, again, soundness. And to disrupt this continuity of the flesh leaves the body open to insult, to disease, because of your indignation, which again is an anger or a result of some perceived moral injustice. There is no health in my bones, Again, a similar analogy, the health of the bones being the primary scaffolding, the structure of the body by which the tendons, ligaments, muscles act on to produce movement, to provide us with this bodily form. There is no health in my bones because of my sin. There's no structure to my physical reality, to my earthly reality because of my sin. And I think this is the key component. And so I shall say it again. There is no structure to my earthly reality because of my sin, because of my unjust, immoral behavior. For my iniquities have gone over my head. Like a heavenly burden, they are too heavy for me. So an interesting statement. His crimes against the divine law have gone over his head, beyond his perceptibility. And I think we can see here, if something goes beyond our perceptibility, beyond our sight and perception, they are likely to invade many aspects of our life. Certainly well out of our control. Like a heavy burden, they are too heavy for me. He continues in verse 5, "My wounds stink and fester because of my foolishness. I am utterly bowed down and prostrate. All the day I go about mourning, for my sides are filled with burning, and there is no soundness in my flesh. I am feeble and crushed. I groan because of the tumult of my heart." And so what can we say of this? My wounds stink and fester because of my foolishness. That is, because of his behavior, the rot and decay have increased. I am utterly bowed down and prostrate. And so, this once upright person has now been forced into a state of that is lower than his prior condition. That is, his moral standing, his idea of virtues have been tested to the point of failure. And perhaps it was the case that his foresight was not enough to prevent him from sinning. And perhaps it was only until after that he saw the consequences of his actions. But regardless, it still remains that this violation of moral virtue has had consequences. And certainly we can imagine that these consequences are all the more severe as one understands the elevated nature of morality, of righteousness. And when these things are violated, the individuals that understand them suffer the consequences. And it's not to say that those who do not fully understand virtue and moral consequences, that they are relieved from suffering the consequences, but it is rather that they, in their blindness, suffer the fate of a blind man, of wandering, of absolute insecurity, and of uncertainty, of instability, the lack of a strong foundation, the lack of an upright nature, the lack of a certainty in the direction to walk in life, the inability to hold the head up high, to be confident in the face of adversity. And so it would be certainly the case for me that I would rather be one educated in virtue and morals and understand the severity of my sin rather than one who is lost and blind and perpetually in a state of stress and anxiety because of it. In verse 9, he says, O Lord, all my longing is before you. My sighing is not hidden from you. My heart throbs, and my strength fails me, and the light of my eyes, it has also gone from me. So we can see here that even the one that strives to be virtuous, moral, upright, is not safe from these feelings that return to him, as are so frequent in our previous example of the blind man, of the wandering man. These sins lead us to that state of being. And of course, as upright people, it is not our lot in life to be this way, to be these types of beings, to exist in this way. It is to be upright, to stand tall, and to be confident. My friends and companions stand aloof from my plague, and my nearest kin stand far off. So in some sense, it's a good thing. This doesn't sound like a plague that I would want my friends or my kin to be involved in. However, for my friends and companions, I would not wish that they would stand aloof, potentially unaware of these types of sufferings, which would mean some of the closest people to me are unable to see this sort of thing, this suffering. And if that is indeed the case, then they are perhaps in a state of blindness. And as a friend, even in my suffering, I would want them to understand it. I would want, at least for myself, to know that they know where it comes from. And I would want to feel secure in the understanding that these friends and these companions had the profundity and the totality, and perhaps the wisdom to see and to understand virtue and morality, justice, these principles, to such a degree that they would be able to see where the suffering comes from. And in that understanding, I would be relieved to some degree, because at least I had people that were close to me that could assist me. Not necessarily right the wrongs of my sins, but to provide understanding and provide a path to walk so that it may not happen again, and to resolve the current suffering. And it's often the case in the Psalms that we observe the psalmist, or David, the author, whoever, talking about his enemies. As in the case of verse 12, those who seek my life lay their snares. Those who seek my hurt speak of ruin and meditate treachery all day long. And so we have heard this type of language often in the Psalms, and there are a few different interpretations. I think the most obvious interpretation is that those, if we are to separate those, the word that is those, from this verse, and we were to put it in its own room, void of the comfort, potential comfort, with the communication of its friends, its other fellow words, and we were to ask it a question. And if we were to ask it, if we were to say, "Who are you?" those may answer, "I am those in David's life who seek to hurt him. I am those within Israel and those without Israel who are wicked, wish to do him harm." And this word, those, may also say, "I am the spirit of everything, of anything that may lay a life within a snare and seek the hurt of a man." And within this spirit, I mediate treachery all day long. And in this sense, it's not a specific individual. It is the absolute totality of possibility of anything invading and infecting the mind that will pervert one's steps away from the true path that they should be walking on. And it's in that sense of those, that I think is more profound. It covers more bases. It's almost an immortal spirit, because in our lives, from birth until adulthood, we may find many people that come into our lives and come out of our lives that have had varying degrees of effects on us. And in terms of the more negative, the potential snares that are laid by them, it's not one individual, it's multiple. And all of these people, if we are to say anything in common of them, if there's a unity, that unity represents the spirit of treachery of those that wish to pervert, again, to pervert our steps, our sense of righteousness and morality. He continues, "But I am like a deaf man. I do not hear, like a mute man who does not open his mouth. I have become like a man who does not hear, and in whose mouth are no rebukes." And so I'd like to pause here for a second and reflect on the work of the Psalms thus far. I believe I've made a similar reflection in the past. But right now, I can see and I can feel the change that is occurring within me. This change that is methodical. It isn't quite an explicit understanding at this point. It's both increasing a sense of intuition, but also providing a procedure, a routine by which I continually examine the questions of the more heavenly or divine nature. And it's through this practice and participation in this practice that slowly but surely the divine becomes more clear. The light begins to shine through. And so I say that in part because of these verses. But I am like a deaf man. I do not hear, like a mute man who does not open his mouth. I've become like a man who does not hear, and in whose mouth are no rebukes. The procedure that this process of reading the Psalms and thinking about them, discussing them, albeit by myself, but discussing them nonetheless, I can appreciate what he means when he says, "But I am like a deaf man," or a mute man. This deafening of his ability to take in information from the external environment, to make sense of it, to be attentive. And it's through this process, that this isn't the only process, obviously, in my life, but through these processes, through engagement, through focused attention, I think it brings one closer to the divine nature, about the way one should be. Again, it's a slow march, and there's much learning to be had. We are at the very beginning of it. But it is happening nonetheless. The march is continuing. He says, "But for you, O Lord, do I wait. It is you, O Lord my God, who will answer." This voice of reason. For I said, "Only let them not rejoice over me, who boast against me when my foot slips. For I am ready to fall, and my pain is ever before me. I confess my iniquity. I am sorry for my sin. But my foes are rigorous. They are mighty, and many are those who hate me wrongfully, those who render me evil for good, accuse me because I follow after good." And so it comes full circle. And so we see a man who has fallen into a way of being where he is unable to make proper judgments. He is unable to, as he was before, to properly categorize, to differentiate fully between right and wrong, until after the wrong is committed. And I think he's saying here that just because this process, this procedure by which I have been engaged in all my life, being faithful to the truth, just because it has failed me this once, I will wait, because I do understand that it is the right thing to do. I understand that it exists, this procedure to pursue the right, and through the right, salvation, deliverance, satisfaction, the ease of the insecurities and the anxieties, the firm planting of the feet on stable ground, the logical through line through which I can better make sense of my reality. He says, God will answer. Eventually this will pass. But interestingly, he says, for I said, only let them not rejoice over me, who boast against me when my foot slips. And he's saying, don't let these people further me into the unknown, into the wilderness. Prevent them from doing so. So that as I wait for you in this state of being that's less than ideal, I'm not pushed off the edge by these people who boast against me when my foot slips. And I like how he says, for I am ready to fall, and my pain is ever before me. And he says, I confess my iniquity. I'm sorry. And then he returns again, but again my foes are vigorous, they are mighty, and many are those who hate me wrongfully. And it's a struggle with the individual, with the divine, and the corruptive nature of other men against his own. And so you see this struggle and this conflict of him he's fallen off the ladder, he's trying to climb it back up, and yet there are men that are biting at his heels, holding on to him, pulling him back down. And his prayer is asking, please allow me to climb by preventing those who wish me to do me harm from preventing me from climbing. An interesting way to view it. I'd be interested to know the specifics of what he's talking about. Psalm 39. What is the measure of my days? To the choir master, to Jeduthun, a psalm of David. I said, I will guard my ways, that I may not sin with my tongue. I will guard my mouth with the muzzle, so long as the wicked are in my presence. I was mute and silent. I held my peace to no avail, and my distress grew worse. My heart became hot within me. As I mused, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. O Lord, make me know my end, and what is the measure of my days. Let me know how fleeting I am. Behold, you have made my days a few handbreadths, and my lifetime is as nothing before you. Surely all mankind stands as a mere breath. Surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely for nothing. They are in turmoil. Man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather. And now, O Lord, for what do I wait? My hope is in you. Deliver me from all of my transgressions. Do not make me the scorn of the fool. I am mute. I do not open my mouth, for it is you who have done it. Remove your stroke from me. I am spent by the hostility of your hand. When you discipline a man with rebukes for sin, you consume me like a moth, what is dear to him. Surely all mankind is a mere breath. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my cry. Hold not your peace at my tears. For I am a sojourner with you, a guest, like all my fathers. Look away from me, that I may smile again, before I depart, and am no more. Very interesting. Very interesting. I think this is going to take a little bit of time to unpack. We see the Psalms progressively becoming more and more complex. So he begins in verse 1 by saying, I said, I will guard my ways, that I may not sin with my tongue. And of course, a guarded way, a guarded behavior, is one that's attentive to the way that one behaves, attentive to the way that one walks, the path that they take, the decisions that they make in conversation, the quality of their relationships. And so, given this attention, given his, to the best of his ability, his understanding of righteousness and virtue, he avoids sin. He says, I will guard my mouth with a muzzle, so long as the wicked are in my presence. So when I first read this, I felt as though there was a bit of a comparison that can be made between this psalm and the last. He says, I will guard my mouth with a muzzle, so long as the wicked are in my presence. And of course, to muzzle something, as if you were to muzzle a dog, is to prevent it from biting, to prevent its viciousness, not necessarily to prevent the noise that it makes, but to prevent a severity of action. It's a sort of a tool of temperament. And when we consider Psalm 38, verse 13 and 14, when he says, But I am like a deaf man, I do not hear, like a mute man who does not open his mouth. I become like a man who does not hear, and in whose mouth are no rebukes. This is quite a different meaning. This is an absence. And now in Psalm 39, when he says, I said, I will guard my ways, that I may not sin with my tongue. I will guard my mouth with a muzzle, so long as the wicked are in my presence. This is a temperament, rather than a lacking or an absence of ability. This is now the ability and the temper of the ability to act in a way that is unjust, perhaps. Hence the muzzle. Verse 2, I was mute and silent, I held my peace to no avail, and my distress grew worse. My heart became hot within me. As I mused, the fire burned. Then I spoke with my tongue. And so he says, staying quiet in the presence of the wicked did me no good. He held his peace, but nothing changed. And so what's the answer then? If I put on this muzzle to prevent me from my aggression towards another, but this muzzle did not lead to any resolution, to any just and righteous resolution, then what do? My distress grew worse. My heart became hot within me. It's as if I was a pot set to boil, and I deliberately placed this cover atop of it. And now I seemingly also, from perceiving and hearing or seeing the wickedness of another, it has gotten into my mind, and my conscious perception of it now plagues me. It tortures me. My heart is hot within me. And as I linger on it, as I think about it, as I reflect on it, as I mused, this heat that's bubbling up in my heart due to my observations of the wicked burned stronger. Then finally, like a torrent, like a river that was blocked by a dam, the pressure has overcome it. And I spoke with my tongue. And he says, O Lord, make me know my end, and what is the measure of my days. Let me know how fleeting I am. Now this next series of verses, I believe, are quite profound, because often when we find ourselves in a position, ourselves set up, ready to burst in this way, it's almost intuitive to get the feelings and the logic in parallel to one another. It's sort of a flow state, if you will. And so when this happens, we must listen to it, whether it be our own voice or a voice of another. Certainly doesn't necessarily mean that it's right, but there is conviction there. There is belief there. O Lord, make me know my end, and what is the measure of my days. So if I was to imagine myself saying this, make me know my end, it may be the end of my life, but it's likely the end in terms of purpose. Why am I here? What am I doing? Why are we here? Why are we all doing this? Why do we exist? I desperately want to know my end. And what is the measure of my days? What is the worth of what I have done here? Has it made a difference? Have I done right at all? Am I truly a righteous man? Has my faith been in vain? Let me know how fleeting I am, how temporary this life is, so that I may not get lost in it, absorbed in it, absorbed in myself, lost in a lack of understanding for what is more and what is greater. Verse 5, Behold, you have made my days a few handbreadths, and my lifetime is as nothing before you. Surely all mankind stands as a mere breath. That is, this transitory, temporary thing, a short existence of man. Verse 6, Surely a man goes about as a shadow. Surely for nothing they are in turmoil. Man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather. And so if man is to go about as this shadow, it is this reflection of a greater reality, of a higher truth. And in this Platonic sense, the allegory of the cave, the shadow was something that was to be surpassed. At least, the reality was known to be greater than what they saw as the projection onto the cave wall of all that they had known of the shadows of the outside world. It was not until they went into the outside world that they discovered a greater truth, perhaps a higher purpose, a greater clarity. He says, surely for nothing they are in turmoil. Man heaps up wealth and does not know who will gather it. And so we have to focus here on the direction pointing towards what matters in life. Humanity's existence, man's individual existence, is temporary in the grand scheme of things. And so we must focus on the things that are not transitory, the things that are enduring, that are indefinite or nearly seemingly indefinite. And things like love, of course all the other things that we talked about, this virtue, justice, this striving of the finer things of the soul, I think are all involved here in terms of the indefinite things of our existence that we can focus our attention on. And the superficial things, the superficial pleasures, are to be surrendered, forgotten, placed in their proper context. And surely for nothing they are in turmoil, or surely as a breath, or surely temporarily they are in turmoil. And so all this wealth that they gather, what is it for? Why did they do it? They don't know why they do it. They don't know what it's for. They may not personally benefit from what they do, from their time on this earth, from their bodily existence. And this is not to say that the commitment to one's posterity is not a good and just thing to be committed to. It's rather to say that all things deserve their proper place, and the things that we do at present must be placed in the broader context, the broader scheme of things. Just as our life is temporary, so too are our material possessions. And while we do hope for a brighter future for our children, we have to keep in mind that being caught up in the pursuits of the material may blind us to the higher meaning and purpose that we are meant to fulfill. And so, in a sense, it is our obligation of people of this way to contemplate on the meaning and the purpose prior to their sacrifices in life. So they give it a direction. They throw it into the future in a way that will land in a direction that they want it to land in. And they aren't lost in the wilderness, just trying to satisfy their own egotistical desires. And so again, we return to the focus and the attentiveness on the meaningful, rather than the arbitrary material possessions, which by themselves have no meaning. It is by us, by our perception, that we drive meaning into it, that we raise it from its purely earthly material condition into something that improves our sense of being. And so, whatever we inject this heavenly principle into, it must to the highest degree improve our being, improve our ability to perceive of the divine in this virtuous cycle of improvement, whether it be in architecture, in music, in the various occupations of man. All of these things must have this in mind. Otherwise we suffer a society that is not unlike the society that we find ourselves in today. One that is obsessed with the lower. No doubt it has elements of the higher. But no one can deny, or very few can deny, the directionality that we are headed into, the direction that we head, the path that we walk, compared to the one that we ought to walk. And so it's interesting that these short 3 verses came about because of the inability to hold the antagonism that the author felt from the expression of wickedness. However that expression manifested itself in this instance, it produced in him such a feeling, such a sense, such an intuition that he had to reflect on the finite nature of our existence. And why bother with wickedness if we are only here for a short time? It must be devoted to everything and anything that is higher than what you are giving me now. Verse 7, and now, O Lord, well, what do I wait? My hope is in you. Deliver me from all my transgressions. Do not make me scorn of the fool. Do not make me the scorn of the fool. I am mute. I do not open my mouth. For it is you who have done it. An interesting way to put it. Because God, if he is to remove the self, that is, there is a differentiation between this burst of intuition and this energy towards the finer things and the self prior to this. And if we are to label this the divine intervention, it's an interesting concept. If we are to label this again, the perceptibility of the finer things, it's a difficult thing to contemplate, because it is in a sense, a dissociation between a part of the self, the egotistical self, the self that gives into the base, the self that does not consider the broader context, the self that thinks only in fractions. It doesn't understand the whole. It thinks that the whole is but a fraction that he can occupy and ignore the rest, as if the rest has no effect on him. And it's this arrogance, this lack of humility, that is a transgression. It is a violation of the way of things. And what can we make of this line, deliver me from all my transgressions, do not make me the scorn of the fool? Now this requires understanding the fool, the spirit or the pattern that the fool is comprised of. The archetype of this fool is someone with a lack of wisdom or common sense. They have a childlike innocence to them. And perhaps that the fool at times can provide a sort of a comedic relief, because they don't know any better. They often, I think, can also suffer. They can suffer from their naivety and their lack of wisdom. And to say, do not make me the scorn of the fool, is, in this sense, almost obvious. Don't let the one who lacks common sense and wisdom, who has a childlike naivety, look down on me. I never want that to happen for myself. What a terrible feeling that would be, because that would make one lower than a fool. I am mute. I do not open my mouth. For it is you who have done it. And I think we've commented on this. The divine entering into and the separation of the self. And I think at long last, we have experienced it a few times until now, but here we really do have a solid reason. We have solid reason for understanding the conception of God here in the Old Testament. How they separate their minds, indicating the finer things, the objective. I'm not sure how it exists in the mind. For the subject to fracture itself into something that is truly objective, that can see that there is something outside of itself. Certainly, we do it these days without much thought. We seem to be the observers of the world. We have made ourselves into gods, in a sense, because, at least in part of this separation of the self, to be the viewer and the observer, rather than the participant and the player. This leaves us in a certain way, I believe. It's difficult for me to conceive of, but if it's not too far of a stretch to say that the participant and the observer are at home together, but are in different rooms. Both are states of mind. Certainly we have the capacity to participate in any number of human activities, to be in love, to be in the moment. This does not require an objective observer, and those that relegate themselves to the corner of the mind of the observer will miss this participation. They will miss truly what it means to love another and to appreciate the presence of another person. Now, what does this mean as we reflect on verse 9? This differentiation of the I and the you. I won't go as far as to say that all that the you is the self. Not that the you is a creation of man, but rather that man has the mechanism, the mechanical structure, the physiology of the brain and the neurochemistry to perceive of these sorts of things. And it's a structure of reality. It is a tool of the mind that we use to experience reality. But reality itself is still separate from us. It's not as though we create it. It's not as though it ceases to exist when we lay our heads on the pillow to go to sleep, nor does it cease to exist when we are buried beneath the earth. It is always present. We can prove this. We have writings from those who have existed before us. We have video. We have carbon dating. We have fossils. We have any number of tools to solidify our understanding and faith in the external environment that's separate from our minds. And just because we can go quite deep into our own consciousness, we should never forget that there is always a way out of it, that there is an external reality, and this differentiation from the I and the you is a reality. Now, what this means in terms of the conception of the divine, I really don't know. Remove your stroke from me. I am spent by the hostility of your hand when you discipline a man with rebukes for sin. You consume, like a moth, what is dear to him. Surely, all mankind is a mere breath. Another quite profound statement. This appeal to God to lessen the severity of the punishment for wrongdoing. When you discipline a man with rebukes for sin, you consume him like a moth, what is dear to him. And then interestingly, the next line is a reflection on the transitory nature of life, on the shortness of life, as though to say, your rebukes, your punishments for our wrongdoings are so harsh, it makes me reflect and almost be thankful that life is not too long. It's a mere breath. However, I would say that the upright are less prone to this type of rebuke or punishment because they avoid much of it in their life, or rather much of the behavior that would lead to the type of consequences that are spoken about here. They are less likely to lose all that is dear to them. Like a moth, because they have a proper understanding of what should be dear to them. And this proper orientation, this proper alignment of what should be and what they do keep close to them sort of acts as a natural immunological agent to the effects of the divine spirit. Not that the divine spirit is a pathology. Certainly it's a pathology to the wrongdoers and the evil among men. But it is a cure for the righteous, and a pathology for the wicked. So Psalm 39 finishes with verses 12 and 13. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my cry. Hold not your peace at my tears, for I am a sojourner with you, a guest like my fathers. Look away from me, that I may smile again before I depart, and I am no more. So the line, for I am a sojourner with you, a guest like our fathers, I think is particularly interesting to me, because it is the recognition of the transitory nature of life. A sojourner is a traveler and a temporary resident. And again, it just implies that his conscious mind, as he experiences it in that moment, he recognizes that unity that he strives for with God will one day come to an end, at least in that form. And so it's an interesting idea, interesting way of thinking. Certainly a reasonable way of thinking. Now this last line is interesting. Look away from me, that I may smile again. And so if you're talking to God and asking him to look away, I believe what he's saying here is, relieve me of your judgment. As he has been talking about the sort of worth of a seemingly fleeting life. What does it mean? How do you make the most of it? When he says, look away from me that I may smile again, I don't think he implies that he wishes for the Lord to turn away from him, but rather for him to be looking away and attentive elsewhere. It means he doesn't need to attend. He doesn't need to bring down the divine judgment on the soul of this person, of this psalmist. And so therefore he may smile again, because he understands that he is liberated from the burden of that judgment. He's liberated from wickedness and wrongdoing. And the author finishes by saying, before I depart, and I am no more. Again, another recognition of the temporary nature of the self, of the conception of the I. And so that concludes Psalm 39. And so we're going to continue here with Psalm 40, which is titled, My Help and My Deliverer. To the choir master, a Psalm of David. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after a lie. You have multiplied, O Lord my God, your wondrous deeds, your thoughts toward us. None can compare with you. I will proclaim and tell of them. Yet they are more than can be told. In sacrifice and offering you have not delighted, but you have given me an open ear. Burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, behold, I have come. In the scroll of the book it is written of me. I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. I have told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. Behold, I have not restrained my lips. As you know, O Lord, I have not hidden your deliverance within my heart. I have spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I have not concealed your steadfast love and your faithfulness from the great congregation. As for you, O Lord, you will not restrain your mercy from me. Your steadfast love and your faithfulness will ever preserve me. For evils have encompassed me beyond number. My iniquities overtake me, and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head. My heart fails me. Be pleased, O Lord, to deliver me. O Lord, make haste to help me. Let those be put to shame and disappointed altogether, who seek to snatch away my life. Let those be turned back and brought to dishonor who delight in my hurt. Let those be appalled because of their shame, who say to me, Aha, aha. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say continually, Great is the Lord. As for me, I am poor and needy, but the Lord takes thought for me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, oh my God. And so what I'm understanding more and more as I read more about these Psalms is that there is a profound knowing in being, in this process of being in harmony with existence. It involves processes, it involves practices. And I can't help but to think that through this ritual of reading the Psalms, that I begin to embody, inhabit this state of mind. This state of mind that continually asks the questions and inquires of the finer things. That my conception of the finer things refines itself through this practice. And knowing of the divine nature slowly begins to reveal itself to me. Now, of course, this is not an excuse for explicit knowledge and empirical evidence. There's place for that. But this is also a fundamental source of understanding and this sort of procedural process, this commitment to practice that reveals truth in time, like a carpenter or a tradesman that practices through repetition things about their work, about their occupation, how they move, how they use the tools, how they feel. All of this goes into a deeper understanding of the trade itself. And no doubt over time, as they think, little by little, the more sophisticated works that are associated with master tradesmen develop. And so this is what I think about when I think of verse 1 and verse 2. I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. And so I think what we see here is this process. The author here has gone through the process. He indicates patience. He indicates a cry, which is, if we were to think about this symbolically, a cry is the result of a profound emotion, a sort of profound, it can come from many different areas, of course, but a cry of wanting comes from an existential place. It's a very deep type of cry from a very deep type of angst and suffering. And so patience, accompanied with this driving emotion, led him to a position where his mind was able to be dragged up from the pit of destruction. And we have a tendency to think about the pit of destruction being physical, purely. But I think also the pit of destruction can be much more sinister, much more nuanced. It can be the darkness of mind, the absence of the light of the intellect. unable to perceive of the higher things, of the finer things, which involves understanding the nature of our reality and the subject's relation to it. And I say that in part because he continues with the imagery by saying, out of the miry bog, where at once if we just read the pit of destruction, he drew me up out of the pit of destruction, it could be that he's talking about because of the numerous enemies that surround him. But the miry bog is something that's a bit different. It's this foggy environment, this inhibiting environment. You get stuck in it. It's hard to travel through. And in this analogy, I think of the mind. I think of the inability to focus one's attention and all of the pathologies that can come from the inability to pay attention, which comes from, in part, a lack of engaging in ritual and this sort of process of understanding, commitment, focusing your attention on something. And he continues, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. So he's pulled up out of a place of potential destruction, a place of inhibition, and now he's up higher, onto a more stable surface. He's less likely to be destroyed upon the surface, less likely to be moved upon the surface. So verse 3, he put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. And when I think of this, I think of a creative element, a song being, again, a way of being, moving into harmony with, the body and the environment. And for this song, a new song, to be put into his mouth, I think has to come from a new sense of understanding, a newfound enlightenment of the mind. And the praise follows from that, because of this new understanding. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. And I like the words of verse 4 when he says, blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after a lie. And I was thinking about this the other day, certainly in the sense of our modern context, when we consider the weaponization of our language, the inversion of meaning that the words are tethered to, the absolute value that underlies all things. And I couldn't help but to imagine that humanity's biggest, and probably, I'm not sure if we will ever surpass this, but the biggest question remains the question of the ought. And how easily we can find ourselves in a position and be objectively wicked people without ourselves knowing or understanding it. Perhaps somebody that pursues a cryptocurrency empire or trading platform. And these people are pursuing the money. But the money in the modern day, in the modern context, under the current economic theory, is valueless. And so they chase something of no value so that they themselves can have value in their life by purchasing material things, which I will admit, can bring people true value depending on how they use it. There are plenty of material tools that people can buy and use to enrich their sense of being and connectedness with the world and others and with others. However, this transaction between the meaningless to the potentially meaningful is a parasitic process. It is robbing the system blind. The system itself, propped up by nothing. Absolutely nothing. In verse 11 and verse 12, there's another recognition of the human nature, of the fallen nature. As for you, O Lord, you will not restrain your mercy from me. Your steadfast love and your faithfulness will ever preserve me. For evils have encompassed me beyond number. My iniquities have overtaken me, and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head, and my heart fails me. And so it's this understanding and this faithfulness to the process of enlightening the mind to perceive of the Lord's goodness, of his faithfulness, righteousness. The faithfulness in the process of doing so. And he says, he makes this connection by making by indicating the understanding that he's not perfect. Again, he is fallen. His iniquities have overtaken him. He cannot see. And this recognition of when the behavior of man blinds sight to reflect on the behavior that had caused the blindness, I think is a virtue. What we might call that, I'm not sure. Perhaps humility. So to continue here, Psalm 41. This is the last psalm in Book 1 of the Psalms. O Lord, be gracious to me. To the choir master, a Psalm of David. Blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him. The Lord protects him and keeps him alive. He is called blessed in the land. You do not give him up to the will of his enemies. The Lord sustains him on his sickbed. In his illness you restore him to full health. As for me, I said, O Lord, be gracious to me. Heal me, for I have sinned against you. My enemies say of me in malice, when will he die, and his name perish? And when one comes to see me, he utters empty words, while his heart gathers iniquity. When he goes out, he tells it abroad. All who hate me whisper together about me. They imagine the worst for me. They say, a deadly thing is poured out on him. He will not rise again from where he lies. Eve, my close friend, in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me. But you, O Lord, be gracious to me, and raise me up, that I may repay them. By this, I know that you delight in me. My enemy will not shout in triumph over me, but you have upheld me of my integrity, and set me in your presence forever. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Amen and amen. And so it's a fairly straightforward psalm here. We have a recognition of the elevation of the poor in the beginning of the psalm. Blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of trouble the Lord delivers him. And in the rest of this, it is another something that is not foreign to the first book of the Psalms. This suffering, this an individual that's surrounded by people that wish to do him harm, empty words, very little meaning, very little value, and through this suffering, he says, no, I cannot be this way. I have to have faith that my condition here and my experience here in this life, the remaining time that I have, is not meaningless, regardless of those who surround me. And it is up to me to find that meaning and purpose. It is up to me to, in another way to put it, to worship God, to receive that meaning, that purpose. And so that concludes our first book of the Psalms, Psalms 1 through 41. So we will continue next time with Book 2, Psalm 42. Why are you cast down, O my soul?